Now that we have talked a lot about really the audiences and kind of how to harvest that audience, we're going to be diving into the types of content. And the first thing to look at when evaluating the types of content and the effectiveness of content is really looking at the length of content that you are focusing on. And there are essentially two different forms of content that we look at. It's short form content and long form content. And there's a lot of kind of potential dilemmas that face content creators in this debate over whether to use a ton of short-term content, whether to focus on long-form content. They each have various different objectives that they satisfy. They also have a lot of different drawbacks and implications as far as budgets are concerned. So there's a lot to consider when actually developing your strategy there. Short-term content can look at things like blogs, social posts, GIFs, memes, things like that. Long-form content is more like white papers, it could be ebooks, webinars, longer videos, longer articles, those kind of pieces of content. There's a lot of things that go into the length consideration, and then fortunately there's no real universal rule when it comes to the best length of content. There are a ton of different factors that go into it as far as your audience, kind of where you are within your product cycle, how new is your brand, how trusted is your brand, all of those different elements that go into it, and also your business goals as well. And, when you're evaluating the audience and when you're evaluating the different types of content that you're going to be creating, there's really three primary considerations that we look at. And it's your target audience. So, are you targeting millennials? Do they have a short attention span? What kind of devices are they using? All of those factors come into play. And then what the marketing objectives are as well. So what are you trying to do? If you're trying to reposition your brand potentially as, something that's very social conscious or something along those lines, you might want to look at doing some long form, more dramatic content to be able to position yourself differently. And then what's the user intent and journey that people are going to take with that content? So is it something that you intend to entertain? Is it something that you intend to educate? And where they are along that product cycle journey will inform the length considerations as well. Some additional considerations and questions to ask yourself is how much does your audience know already? So are you coming into a new category? Are you introducing a brand new product that people maybe don't even know how to use? That's something to really take into consideration that might inform the type and length of content that you're creating. How interested are your readers? So is it something that's fairly straightforward? Maybe it's pretty dry and vanilla, or is it something that people can really dive into and get excited about? Especially within the enthusiast categories that I work within, people really want to consume that type of content. So it can never be really long enough, it seems like. So, how interested are your readers? That'll inform the length considerations as well. And really, it comes down to what kind of resources your business has for content production. So do you have a staff that contains great long form writers? So the same kind of writer that creates good short form content is not always the same kind of writer that creates good short form content. So that's another, area to look at as far as consideration too. And then what is the user intent too? So using keywords to be able to grab people's attention and kind of bring them along on the journey is an important objective there too. And then looking at the business goals for the content too. So what are we looking at it to do? Are we looking at it to do some heavy lifting for maybe a product launch? Is this something that we are just using to continue to engage an existing audience? And maybe it's a maintenance objective there. Or maybe are we looking to break into a brand new category? Those are all consideration questions to look at. So the definition of a short term or short form content, I should say, is really, it's kind of small. It can be written, it can be video, it can be visual content, even things like photography. But the communication itself is in a very crisp and concise format. So, if we're looking at written content, it's usually under 1,200 words. Video content is, shorter than basically 30 seconds. So it's something that's really easily digestible. A lot of social content falls into this play within this definition. There are a lot of areas that you would want to use short form content. So again, if you've got an audience that's pretty familiar with your business or even your products and services, they get it, they understand it. Like, I use the example of cereal here. People can get a pretty good grasp on what cereal is, right? There isn't a lot of heavy lifting there. So, potentially more short form, entertaining type of content might be an interesting thing to look at for that versus kind of these long epic pieces. Where's the trust? How do you have an established trust with your audience and your brand already? Is that something that already exists, or is that something that you're looking to create? Potentially short form content. If you do have that trust already, it's a great use of content that's a little bit more cost efficient, as well as you begin to develop that kind of cadence of pushing out that content. Pricing is another consideration. That's great to use short form content if you have potentially a lower budget, or even if you're working on less expensive or more commonly used products too. That can be a really good use of a content format for that too. And then looking at the platforms. So some platforms require shorter content. If you're looking at things like TikTok, there's obviously, a time limit for that as well. Again, social, those different platforms, you have to look at creating shorter form content to be able to satisfy that if you are going to be serving it up within those platforms. And there's a lot of benefits for, short form content. There's an improved reader completion. So if you create something that's going to be, maybe it's a webinar, maybe it's say an ebook, the actual completion, the reader completion goes down because it invests a lot more time and effort for that reader to, actually go through that content. Another thing is, really from a mobile perspective, 52% of all global internet traffic is done through your mobile devices. So short form content can be really great for that. Whereas when you get into some of the longer form content, maybe it's an e-course or, again, a webinar or something like that, you might have a better experience when viewing it from something like a desktop as well. And it's also less labor intensive to create. So again, looking back at those resources that the company has available, being real truthful for that and not just being aspirational and hopeful, but understanding how much time it's going to take to create those blogs, to create those posts, to do those videos, etc. It is definitely a lot less labor intensive to create short form content. And that allows you to be able to create a cadence and consistency with your content instead of having it be, potentially one really long kind of epic film that you're releasing, once a quarter or once a year. You're able to create this kind of consistency that creates a little bit of a better relationship and engagement with your audience too. And then we also see a lot more ease and shareability for short form content as well. It's easier for somebody to, just hit share or, share it with a friend or share the link, etc. And it's a little bit of a less investment that you're asking for your loved ones or your friends to be able to invest into digesting that content as well. And, really the quick attention leads to engagement as well. So if it's something that's quick, it's easy, it's something that's, that you are able to attain and understand really quickly, then it's easy to get consumers to kind of tip in, be interested, want to learn more, and then potentially look into your longer form content as you go through. So, one of the things I would say, the biggest thing on this page is that consistency, because, the way we look at it as an entire industry is really 60% of all companies struggle to produce constant content, on an ongoing basis. That's the number one challenge, is to be able to produce engaging content on an ongoing basis. So at least including some short form content is a really beneficial thing to add to your content strategy. And another really great example for just a short form blog post is from Airbnb. They do quite a bit of really good content here, but it's a short form post. It's 900 words or so, but they're using bullets. They've got it organized in a way that's really easy to digest. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. Again, it's a blog post. It's pretty straightforward, but it's done in a way that's easily shareable. It's easily digestible, yet it still packs a punch as far as the really the level of education that it communicates throughout that post. It does a very good job of doing that heavy lifting. And although, the media would have us believe that people just don't have the capacity to concentrate anymore, I love the quote that, in reality, you can't have a page that's too long, only one that's too boring, right? So we know that we have the capacity to sit down and, watch hours and hours of our favorite shows on Netflix, or, really dive into a site that we absolutely love. But it needs to be engaging. It needs to be exciting. It needs to be relevant. And it needs to have great content there. So a lot of people falsely shy away from long form content because they think that people are just so fragmented, but that's not really the case. The only thing it does do is it raises the bar for the content to actually be great. It needs to be really good and engaging and interesting. So the definition of long form content, the general kind of rule of thumb, is that it would be anything that exceeds the industry standard for word count and length. So written content, it's over 2,000 words. I've seen a lot of people describe it as over maybe 2,500 words, etc. But it's that longer form that kind of changes within the industry that you work in as well. So there is some flexibility there. But it's longer articles, and then it's video content that's longer than about 45 seconds. This can also be something that within your industry that is the standard of maybe 2 minutes, and it's anything longer than that. So there is some flex there. But again, it's looking at things that they're a bit longer than what their industry standard would be. And it gives you the opportunity to go much more into depth when you're reaching your target audience. So you can go into, your marketing materials, you can go into some of your proof points and your brand story. And again, it's important. I think we've seen throughout a lot of the examples that people have been selecting and that we've been looking at, it's important to be entertaining and not kind of force people to watch a commercial per se in your content marketing strategy, but rather have them kind of discover your benefits through some engaging and interesting and entertaining content, whether that's in, video format, written format, etc. But the long form really gives you that opportunity to go into a lot more depth and create that connection. And, that's the ultimate goal of long form content is to provide that audience with plenty of information, but also entertainment and value. So if it doesn't have the entertainment factor, if it's not something that I want to sit down and consume, or it's not adding significant value to me, maybe it's not even that entertaining, but maybe it's really educational and important for me, for an industry that I'm interested in, for a product line that I'm interested in, then it's still providing a significant value for me. And it's something that I'm going to want to sit down and actually digest. So when do we want to use long form content? We look a lot at maybe higher end product lines. If you're going to be buying something like a Harley Davidson, right? You want content that's going to be engaging. It's going to serve both from an educational perspective, but also even understanding, kind of that culture and give you a brand essence to be able to relate to and give you something that's going to be aspirational too. So higher end products and services typically use long form content quite a bit. And it also, along that line is if it requires more of a commitment for purchase. So that could be either something that's a price point or even, a time that you're committing to the purchase or to the service as well. That would be something that would require a little bit more of a long form content too, to get you a little bit more involved and get you some skin in the game from a content perspective. And if it's longer, if it's more complicated from a purchase cycle, that's another interesting thing to use long form content for as well, to kind of grease the wheels, if you will, to keep you interested and engaged within that product as well, as you go through that longer purchase cycle too. Also, we see a lot of at the early stages of a marketing cycle when your audience has very little to no awareness of your product or service. That's also a really important area to be able to establish yourself. So if you're a brand new product that's hitting maybe an existing market, right, that's well established, but there's little to no awareness of you as a brand or as a product or service, it's a great way to be able to get on the map. So if you're creating this beautiful brand piece, maybe you're doing an epic video and you are going to submit it to, different award shows and things. It's a great way to get some earned media exposure, get people talking about you as a brand, sharing the content. But again, it has to be something that's relevant. It's got to be entertaining. It's got to have a high-end value as well, which is a difficult thing for brands to produce, at least on a consistent basis. And then also the last thing would be products that require a little bit more technical information. So if it's a more complicated product, things like vehicles or, even destinations, things like that require a little bit more explanation are great candidates for long-term or long-form content production as well. And there are a ton of benefits for long-form content. It provides a lot more opportunities for search engines to rank you too, because you have more words in there. It's difficult to create the length of blog posts that are going to be optimized for search. That needs to be a certain length. But the more words that you have in there, the more opportunities there are to be able to be discovered for those search engines and rank as well. And if you have a lot more long-form content on your site, one of the metrics that we look at for a health of a website, whether you're media property, whether you're a brand, is the on-site metrics as well. So the time on site. So people are going to be spending more time on your website, which is another really good thing because you've got more opportunities to engage with them. Long form content also typically positions your brand as an authority. So whether it's a video or whether it's something like an ebook, the more content that you're developing, as long as it's smart and interesting and valuable, it creates that sense of authority with your audience as well. And it can improve conversion rates. It can really drive people to make that decision to purchase because they are persuaded through that form content that they feel like they've spent enough time with you, they understand the brand, they understand the product, and they're ready to make that purchase. And, it's debatable about content as far as getting more shares. A lot of people say that short-term content gets more shares because there's less of kind of a risk of sharing out something like a GIF or a photo or something like that. But the content that is long form that people have read that they find is particularly interesting, they typically share it out, but share it out in a different manner. So they share it out and they say, you have to read this, or it's specifically identified, hey, Aunt Susie, I know that you would absolutely love to read this, but there's an implied kind of endorsement behind that share and an encouragement for them to consume that content. So there is a lot of sharing that goes on, but it's just in kind of a different way than the short form content. And there's an increased user engagement as well. So people are, engaged with the content. They are creating an emotional connection with that brand. So that's another element that's a definite benefit for that content. But again, it has to be good. It can't just be long because we wanted to create something long. And consumers are savvy enough to be able to see through that. So a lot of times we see brands that want to create this epic kind of long form content that just fail pretty miserably. So it's important that if you're going to go this route, that you do it well, and that it's thought out and that's very strategic and it positions the brand in an appropriate manner. And another benefit too for long form content is that you can repurpose it. So you're taking the long form content that might be a video, it might be something that's a really long, blog post that you might be able to turn into quick social posts. Maybe it is an ebook that you're able to drill down into creating 50 different blog posts from. But that ability to take that long form content, repurpose it, and leverage it across several platforms is another really significant reason why people would want to invest in creating that long form content. And there's always this battle that goes back and forth as far as long and short form content. From my perspective, the best content marketers out there, content creators, use a great mix of both. So they're being smart about creating long form content that they're able to repurpose into short form. And there's this cadence and consistency that, that brands and the audience knows that it's going to be able to get some great educational content coming out of that brand. But they're able to engage with them on a daily basis through more short-term content as well. But there's certainly always a battle, of evaluating kind of the benefits and drawbacks. And it's certainly a discussion that we have in many conference rooms for many of the clients that I work with as well, just in what is the right decision for the brand and for that strategy. So creating that strategy, sticking to that strategy, and being able to create the content on an ongoing basis is certainly a struggle, but it can really make or break the success of content marketing. So that concludes the first video of this set.